So I want to welcome you. I think, what is this, maybe the second time or third that I actually led a worship with, not to say that the crew that's been taping isn't human, but they are. But this is like only the second time I've done it when I actually could look out here and see faces, I think. That's a good thing. I'm glad for that. I want to welcome you to in-person worship. I also want to give thanks to God for those who do join us through this digital age, as well as through the radio ministry that you have here. I pray you have come to remember God this day above all else, and that's your primary reason for being here. I know because we need sometimes now to still sing softly and remain socially distanced. I encourage you to let the deacons, let you elders let you out so that you don't gather in a spot so that we keep our social distancing. I know it's strange. I feel the strangeness. I am tired of it. I am anxious. I am all those things that you are, and maybe more so. But at the same time, I understand that we are here for a reason. Let none of us be like that one man who brought his young son, to church after the pandemic had been kind of lying down and they had in-person worship again. And during the entire service, the father was mumbling about the service not being the way he had remembered it. The father started complaining as soon as the two of them got into the car to go home. He was complaining that the service was too long, the preacher was no good, and the singing wasn't really singing. Finally, the little boy said to his daddy, he said, "Daddy, I thought it was pretty good for $1." So once upon a time, there was a person who found this precious stone, a very precious jewel worth maybe $500,000. A short time later, that same person met a traveler who said he was hungry and asked the person with the jewel if it was possible to share some of the person's food with him. So the bag of provisions was thrown open, and the traveler saw this precious stone and on an impulse asked the person if he could have it. And amazingly, the person did not hesitate to give the jewel to the traveler. The traveler departed quickly, overjoyed with his new possession. However, a few days later, the traveler came back, searching for the person who had given him the jewel. When he finally found him, he returned the jewel to the man and had one request. "Please give me something more valuable, more precious than this stone. Please give me that which enabled you to give me this precious stone." I believe, along with others, that God is a God of abundance and not a God of scarcity. I believe that God is a generous giver, but that we can only see and enjoy God's generosity when we love God with our entire being, with our hearts and minds and all our strength. As long as we say, I will love you, God, but first show me your generosity, we will remain distant from God and unable to experience what God truly wants to give us, which is life, and life in abundance. Added to this is that we fail to see the true value of our lives and of our congregations when we are blind to the gifts God gave us to share with the entire world. So in the story about Jesus in Mark, today we see a person with great spiritual focus. Jesus was focused on what he was meant to be focused upon: healing, casting out evil, and proclaiming the call to turn around and walk towards the will of God. He seems to model for us a need to step back, to be alone for a period of time so he might go on to do what he knew he was supposed to do, what his real purpose and mission was. You have been away from this building now for some period of time. I wonder if you've used this time to reflect on why you exist and what your identity is as God's people. So let me ask you a question. But before I ask the question, I have some instructions for you. I want you to look around right now. Just look around. Look at everything. Check out the stained glass. You know, it only takes 6 weeks for people to gather in one place and not to notice beauty around them. I walk into your sanctuary and I look at these stained glass windows and I go, these things are awesome. And yet I wouldn't be surprised occasionally you yawn. Now here's the question, but you have to hear it in the context of something else. Now, let me set it up. Here's the headline in the Findlay Courier and the Toledo Blade. Powerful tornadoes level Bethlehem Lutheran Church in Pemberville. The end line, it says, some call it a miracle that no one was injured or killed in the small town, but local historical church has been leveled to its foundations. Here's the question. What would be the cost to replace this church? Now, do you have a replacement cost in your mind? But before you answer that question, let me ask you some more questions. You have considered, of course, the overall mission, ministry, and day-to-day activity of this church in your calculations, correct? You've included the salaries of church staff members and the wages of others who work around the church or for the church, like carpenters or plumbers or electricians or such, whoever you might hire to do different work here. You have included, of course, the preschool and aftercare program that provides a Christ-centered program for children along with the salary of 9 staff people. Now, I recognize that this is not a specific ministry of Bethlehem, but it provides a service to young families in the community. You have included, of course, in the value of a community that has a community food pantry housed in its building, and that it also houses a county senior center. In the value of the food pantry, you have remembered how it helps people fill their pantries and the prayers the volunteers may pray over those individuals and families that utilize those services. You have remembered the value of having people come together for support and meals when COVID-19 did not exist and how that will be critical in the future. The ministry in another country also needs to be considered in this value. You have considered, of course, in your replacement cost, all those other ministries that come about because of the children of God at Bethlehem. So how much is your church worth? How many millions upon millions of dollars would it cost to replace this community of faith? And I am not just talking about the building. It is far more than that. If it is only about the replacement of the physical plant, then there is no doubt in my mind and heart that you have failed to understand your identity and why you have always been meant to be here. The children of God of every generation are about bringing healing to the broken and wounded, standing against all that would diminish the humanity of any person, and call people to the life of God through Jesus Christ. If this is not at the heart of our existence, then we should probably remove the word church from our signs. If you begin to know and shake your heads with affirmation at the value you have to each other and to the broader community, then humbly give thanks to God. Truly, you are far wealthier than you can imagine because God called you into existence generations ago. And you are now here to be the ministers, not only within this church, but within this community. How awesome is that? Wow. This discovery should help you feel more confident about your ministry and mission, because what you're doing has real value to the community around you. In your worship services, you have some treasures, and these should be shared generously. The Apostle Paul has such an enthusiastic outward focus that he says, I have made myself a slave to all so that I might win more of them. He sees the people around him as potential recipients of the gospel, and he pledges to do anything he can do to win them over. To the Jews, he becomes a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law, I become as one under the law, so that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law, I become as one outside the law, so that I might win those outside the law. To the weak, I become weak, so that I might win the weak. He's become all things to all people, while maintaining his identity and his focus on Jesus Christ. And the value of that relationship. His approach is the same one that you should be taking today as your congregation tries to reach all people and save some. Everything you do is for the sake of the gospel, so that you might share in its blessings as well as share its blessings. Many, many years ago, a grandmother brought her 5 granddaughters to church with her. They were like maybe 3.5 until close to 9 or 10. They became regular worshipers in the church. The mother was a believer, but she seldom attended worship. But one day, all the girls came pitter-pattering up to the pastor and asked if they could be baptized. Now, the pastor talked with the mother and the grandmother to get permission, and it happened. It was one of the most holy worship times the pastor ever experienced. Oh, heck, I ever experienced. The mother herself, for some reason, never joined the congregation. But I came to love these little girls who began to grow up in my presence. But several years later, the mother, in her early 40s, was at home, collapsed, and died. The girls were there, and they were devastated. But for some particular reason, I was not permitted to share this with the congregation. One Sunday, I saw the grandmother and the girls popping into worship. When it was time for communion, the granddaughters walked down the aisle to receive the body and the blood of Christ. And one of the oldest of the 5 walked down in tears. And when she came to me, she stretched out her arms. And quickly, I handed the bread to my assistant minister. And then I did what I thought I could only do. I opened my arms. And this now young woman fell into my arms and began to weep. And I just held her, and I just rocked her. And I could see out of the corner of her eyes some of the people looking and staring at me. I could see the frown from one of the Mabel over there because service wasn't going right. And I didn't care. Finally, she stood up, and with a trembling hand, she reached out. And I said to her, "This, little sister, is the body of Christ, given for you, and he will hold you forever." How do you place a value on that moment, brothers and sisters? The reason for a congregation to have a mission and a vision is to remember, though limited, it still has the ability to be of great value to the community in which God has placed it. This time away is a time to focus not on your personal needs, but upon the gifts that God has given so many of you, and how much this place is truly of value to this community. You see, meeting human needs and building relationships, priceless. Your congregation has value because it provides you, I pray, with personal and spiritual growth through all the seasons of life. But when you calculate the true worth of a church and the cost to replace it, you have to look outward and think of the ways that it extends the blessings of Jesus Christ to others. What would it cost to replace Bethlehem Lutheran Church? What would it cost to relocate and restart the food pantry? What child could be left without a safe and caring place if children no longer were given such a place? How do you place the value upon an environment that not only lets children know they are cared for, but also prayed for? How much would it cost to find another way to minister to people living in Honduras? Think of all the ways Bethlehem has cared for others and can still care unless it's stopped caring. So, I leave you with this question. How valuable is Bethlehem Lutheran Church in Pemberville, Ohio? I hope it's priceless.